Welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofit leadership and sustainability, where the passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact are celebrated. With your host, Jarrett Ransom, get ready to explore inspiring stories and game changing strategies of nonprofit leaders from across the sector. In this season, we're focusing on critical management challenges that are key to the long-term success of nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense, in-depth conversations with the real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and learn how to navigate and overcome the challenges that help build stronger, more sustainable organizations. Now, let's dive in and harness the collective power of our nonprofit networks to create lasting change.
Hey there, and welcome back, fellow nonprofit nerds. I am so excited to introduce you to today's guest, Dr. Sonia Daniels. She joins us from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and she brings her deep expertise and her heart to the nonprofit sector. Sonia is a seasoned professional. She's passionate about helping organizations grow in sustainable and meaningful ways. In our conversation, Sonia invites us to lead with our human side. She talks about the importance of self-awareness as well as conscious leadership and staying grounded in who we are as we serve others. But before we jump in, I want to send a big thank you to this season's podcast sponsors, Bloomerang and the Fundraising Academy at National University. Thank you so much. Your support makes these important conversations possible, and I am truly grateful. Now let's dive into this powerful conversation with Dr. Sonia Daniels. Well, Sonia, I am so thrilled to have you. For everyone listening, I am honored to introduce you to Sonia Daniels. If you haven't met her yet, now you cannot say that. Sonia, I forget when it was we met. I know it's been several years. I feel like I've been fangirling you ever since I met you. So again, welcome and thank you for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Jarrett, for having me. I believe we met during the pandemic, and I think I was the other podcast. I think was one of my first podcast features. So you kind of introduced me to this world. So I'm loving this full circle moment.
Yeah, I do remember it definitely was during the pandemic. I had the opportunity of meeting so many amazing people. I continue to meet amazing people. So I love, like you said, coming back full circle, having another conversation to dive deeper. So I've been diving into, really navigating wellness. What does that look like for us as leaders? I did that for the first four seasons of this podcast. The next four are really all around leadership sustainability. And I have found that dovetails or complements, I should say, and complements quite nicely, right? Navigating wellness, leadership sustainability. So first of all, I also acknowledge everyone is a leader in the sector, but I'd love for you to share, Sonia, how you show up as a leader. How do you work with nonprofits? What is it you do in this space? What does that look like for you in the work that you do?
Yeah, so such a good question, Jarrett. So I started in the nonprofit sector. This was my first job was actually a nonprofit job. But officially as my big girl nonprofit job, I started in a leadership role in my first big girl job at a nonprofit as a regional operations manager. And so what was really interesting about that was my first experience of being able to really be in a position where I was guiding people, I was guiding the organization. So that was a huge learning curve for me, but super grateful for all the experiences that came from that. And so with that experience, that experience kind of pushed me into consulting, which is what I do now, working with nonprofits and also working with leaders across different sectors. And so a lot of the work that we do originally started off as operations focused work, really helping organizations build capacity. Now, over the course of 7 years as a consultant, that work has now evolved into a niche around leadership development, specifically mindset mastery. Because what I learned in all of my consulting experiences with my nonprofit folks was that folks who start nonprofits or run nonprofits are super heart-led, really excited about working with the community and solving some type of societal issue. But there's often a gap when it comes to competence in that role. And so once I recognized that gap and why the projects I was working on wasn't moving forward, we were able to really pinpoint how to help leaders build competence so that they can be confident in their positions and helping their organization scale and grow. So I love the work that I do. I love the people that I work with. And that is how I got here to where I am today as a consultant to nonprofits.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I love that. I love the mindset focus that you have as well. I have seen that in my own life, right? Lived experiences, personal and professional experiences. So alongside that, Sonia, I really want to ask, like, when it comes to leadership, sustainability, which I feel like is a total buzzword, we might all define it a little differently. But what does leadership and what does sustainability look like for you today, right? In our current state of affairs in this nonprofit sector?
Yes. Ooh. Although this is such a tricky topic to talk about, I love being able to have these conversations with folks because what's happening right now with our economy and with our current administration, these are conversations that need to be had because it really will shift the way the nonprofit sector is functioning. But specifically, when we talk about leadership in the intersection of sustainability, a lot of what we're seeing right now is that leaders are needing to be more human in their approach with their team members in our current economy. And so what that looks like is being a lot less rigid about how leaders would normally operate in their roles. Now leaders are being forced to be conscious about how they show up, how they manage their own emotional intelligence, how they inspire people as opposed to like commanding people to move forward in their work. And so that does require a lot of self-work when we talk about leaders, because folks have to be able to do those things for themselves to be able to do that for their team. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing right now with some of the leaders that I'm working with is helping them figure out how to bring a more humanistic approach to their leadership. Even if they're, the ED of an organization or if they're a board president, it's still necessary to understand just how to work with people in this economy. Folks are scared. Folks are unsure about what's happening next. There's a lot of different feelings that are coming to the surface. And so it's just important for leaders to really understand how to manage all of those different moving pieces, but how to still help their team feel confident in what is happening next. Because at the end of the day, there's work that still needs to be done. So that has been our approach to sustainability, but specifically in the leadership space.
That is amazing. I love that you called out the human side, right? Like
Mhm.
for me, the way that lands with me is the human experience, authenticity, vulnerability. You said self-awareness, right? Emotional intelligence, like having that EQ. I'm curious, has this always been your leadership style, or how might you particularly define your leadership style? And maybe it's changed over your career trajectory.
Yeah, I love that question. This has essentially been my leadership style, more of just like a conscious approach to leadership. I've always been really cognizant of how I work with people. And so being in a leadership role has really helped me understand, but also define what type of leader I want to be in the space. A big part of it is that I like leaving people better than I found them. And so that is really important in how I show up. And so I really fall into like a mix of different leadership styles. But for the most part, I would say it really seesaws between being a conscious leader, but then also a servant leader as well. I never want to be in the space where I'm telling people to do stuff or forcing them to do stuff. I really enjoy being able to see the best in people and encouraging them to see that in themselves. So that is my approach to leadership. And it always has been that way, whether it was just managing or leading a team of one or managing teams as large as like 30 to 40 people.
Yeah. And that's so very powerful. And that I've seen, again, power, success, just so much, I'm going to use the word improvement. I know it doesn't always improve, but like really looking at that as an example of adaptation, right? And
Yeah.
they say the only constant is change. So I'm curious,
Yes.
Are there any particular examples that come up to you? Anything about how you have adapted a nonprofit, again, working with so many organizations that you have in particular, right? Like to the changing economic and even social landscape. Are there any examples or scenarios maybe, right? That you're like, this one time that comes to mind?
Yeah, so I love that you asked that question that way. It makes me actually think of a few different situations or scenarios I've had just in different client projects. But I'll talk about currently what I'm working on right now with one of my clients. And so I'm working with this fabulous organization. It's a local organization here in Baton Rouge. And so I've been working with this organization probably for about 5 years at this point. They've been one of my longest and most consistent clients. And so what's very interesting about it is that I knew the leader before we actually started working together in this current capacity as a consultant client relationship or partnership. And so right now, we are in a space with the organization where we are having to have hard conversations, just given what's happening with like funders either not funding organizations or being quiet about what's happening next, or grants not being funded, all of these different things that are happening. And so recently we actually pulled the whole team together to do like a scenario planning exercise where we talk through like best case scenario, worst case scenario, but where's the middle ground. And so because I'm a pretty observant person when I facilitate sessions, I was able to really observe how people were like uncomfortable. They didn't want to talk about like the worst case scenario, but I'm like, y'all, we have to have these conversations to be prepared for maybe what could happen. And hopefully it doesn't, right? But we just have to be open to these conversations. And so from the time we started the scenario planning session to the time we ended, I could see and feel the shift that happened with the team. And so when I followed up with the director, we talked about just what their experience was, or just how they felt about the session. And so they mentioned that there was some tension that came from it, but they were able to see the breakthrough that happened. And so it was interesting because the director, I could see that person's confidence also being built in their role as well, because they were able to lead their team through difficult conversations. And so I was grateful to be able to be the person who could kind of like shepherd them through that process. And again, I know wasn't an easy process, but I'm happy that they were open to it. And I'm happy that I could see the growth in the director in terms of just like their competence and confidence around leading a team of people. So that was really fun, a really good experience.
What an example. And I love that. And I'm really curious, Sonia, are you seeing organizations, whether your clients or not, right? Like leaning into these scenario situations on their own? Like, are they saying, hey guys, I think we need to do this, exercise? Twofold question. Like, are you seeing them lean into this? And then secondarily, are you seeing them leaning into it because of our current state? Or maybe this is just what they do. This is part of their best practice, part of their own like operational structure.
Yeah, I love that. So I can actually answer that from both sides, being that I just went through a pivot with my own business, but then
Yeah.
also with just what I'm seeing from organizations that I'm either adjacent to or organizations that I'm actually working with. And so what's been interesting for me with my own consulting firm is that I had this nudge going into this year to pivot anyway, even without knowing what was going to happen with our administration. I just had a nudge to pivot, and I'm glad I did, because I was able to jump ahead of a lot of the challenges that are coming up, or a lot of the issues that a lot of my consulting peers are having, with just not being in a position to anticipate, contracts slowing down, or like opportunity slowing down. And so I'm glad for me, I just naturally kind of felt that nudge to pivot. And so it's been wonderful. I'm grateful I did it when I did. And so on the client side, I have been seeing and hearing a lot of organizations have these difficult conversations, because there's so many realities that have to be faced when we talk about worst case scenario. One being, are you going to have the staff and infrastructure, or the money and infrastructure to maintain a staff, right? And so if these difficult conversations are not being had, then at what point are we going to address the elephant in the room, especially when other people are involved in it? And so I think it's necessary to just be honest about how do organizations need to adjust or shift or anticipate or prepare for what could happen? Because I think that also is like a reputation piece as well, of being able to kind of jump ahead and anticipate what adverse situations might come up. But then on the flip side, now that these difficult conversations are happening, then organizations can kind of think through then what opportunities or options does this present if I'm in a space where maybe the money is not coming in fast enough. And so what I love about that is I'm seeing innovation in the nonprofit space that I think I've been like begging for a while, where organizations are really having to think through like, how do we diversify our funds? How do we, figure out additional streams of revenue? How do we think through maybe partnerships that we haven't explored before? And so for me, as a nonprofit geek, I'm excited that I'm seeing this, although the situation might not be the most ideal for most people. So that makes me excited about the future of the nonprofit space and where leaders are going to kind of shift their priorities. So
Yeah, I'm right there with you, friend. Like, I love the innovation. I love seeing the let's think outside the box, right? Let's approach something differently. I mean, what if you want to see the hair on the back of my neck stand up, tell me that this is the way we've always done it. Right? It's like, okay, times are changing. Before you and I even went live, for this conversation, we were talking about advancements in technology. And I know that technology has evolved drastically in the 20 plus years that I've been in this industry, right? And I even say, likely, Sonia, during this conversation, there's advancements in technology, right?
yes,
So even alongside that, I believe we have to be coerced, right, into adopting and adapting with innovation. And so I love that you brought that up into your example as well.
yeah, I love, Jared, that you mentioned the tech piece as well. And I had the opportunity right after the pandemic to work in the tech for good space. And so that was really helpful to be able to understand the intersection of social good and also the way that tech can help that space. And so even as a consultant, I'm always thinking about, are there tools I can develop, even if it's just like a fancy, spreadsheet that kind of does, some its own automations and stuff, but really also helping my clients, especially our grassroots, the really small, lean team organizations, also figure out how they can use technology to their advantage. So these are also conversations we're having as well of, if you need to let team members go, is there a technology tool out there that can replace what they were doing, even just temporary, right? So I'm loving that we're having more innovative conversations in a space that hasn't always, I guess, acknowledged that it could benefit from technology. So I'm excited about that piece too.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of excitements, and I
Mhm.
think, embracing them is the best thing we can do, as opposed
Yeah.
to, staying away from them or being afraid of them, right? Like really embracing with curiosity, right?
Yes.
Let's just be curious. Let's just
Yes.
come from a place of curiosity. And I see that also move into operational efficiency. Now,
Yes.
I feel like you know so much about operations. I mean, even as you shared about your big girl job, right? Your first big girl job in the nonprofit space, that was in operations. So I'm
Mhm.
curious what you're seeing now, again, like over your career trajectory. How do you particularly balance the need, or how do you help your clients, right, balance the need for, I'm going to say, operational efficiency, but also there's a desire to invest in professional development? Can you speak to
Yes.
us about that, and what you're seeing?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So I guess I'll approach them maybe separately and then maybe talk about where they connect to each other. So
Okay.
operations has always been something I've been super passionate about. And I tell people all the time that my brain works in like frameworks and systems. Like that's just naturally
Yes.
how it functions. And so that works really well as a consultant to nonprofits. Because I often find that social or public sector organizations do struggle with operations more often than not. And it's not to say, for-profit doesn't, because they have their own fair share of issues also. And when it comes to operations, where we are right now, I guess, especially again, if we're talking about the challenges in the economy, I am talking with my clients and helping them understand, what are you doing as an organization? Like, what are all the things on your plate right now? What is necessary that will help the organization not only be viable, but sustainable, right? Because those two things are really important. What are things that you're doing that you are doing just because you think you should be doing, but then you really don't need to be doing? And how can we take that off of your plate? A big part of the operations conversation that I often find people kind of like disconnect the two, but they're necessary and they work really well together, is also governance in the role that board members play in operations as well. And so a lot of the work that we're currently doing is centered around board member engagement in terms of like accountability. So a lot of what I've been seeing in the nonprofit sector when we talk about boards is that people join boards, but then they just don't show up. They might just be there for the title, but then they're not supporting the director of the organization. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing is essentially building in like a level of accountability for board members to say, if you're going to be here, you need to be able to support the operations of the organization. And so that's been what a lot of that work has been looking like. And then what was the other piece you mentioned? I forgot that fast.
That's all right. I love what you shared, such rich
Thank
information. No one has ever tied in the board and the governance in these conversations into
Yeah.
operational efficiency. So I appreciate you doing that. The other part was the professional development, right? Like there's a lot of desire for professional development. And I'm curious, again, what you're seeing to that.
Yeah, so PD is super important. And so a part of the shift in terms of like my firm, when we talk about leadership development, is because I also started sensing a need for PD. But when we talk about PD, not like the long drawn out workshops where people are just like sitting and listening all day. I really love that I'm seeing more PD focused on, again, the human element of the work, where it's really nurturing the people who are doing the work as opposed to giving them information about, set up this system or like implement this new thing. I feel that a lot of PD right now is focused on just human development and character development. And so I've also been leaning into that a lot more, of working with organizations to develop their people, because when you have good people doing good work, the organization will automatically be successful. It kind of all just works together. And so that also supports the operational piece as well. Again, going back to the phrase I mentioned earlier, when people are confident about what they do, they automatically just become more confident in their work. And I can give an example of even talking about, I've been doing some equity work with one of my clients. And so one of the things that came up in conversation was around just the culture of decision making within the organization. And so the leader that I had been working with mentioned that there were some challenges in getting the team to autonomously make decisions within their like respective role or within their respective department. And so in the conversation, I asked the director, I was like, well, do people feel confident enough to make decisions? And so I think that was kind of like a light bulb moment for the director to be like, I never considered, if people are actually confident enough to make decisions within the organization. So that's something that we're going to be working on together, to work with team members to just see where they are and if they actually feel competent or confident enough to be able to make their own decisions in the organization. And I say that because that's something that I used to struggle with as a leader, of just feeling comfortable enough to make decisions. And it was more so of just like a self-concept, self-esteem type thing. And so once I figured that out and had a breakthrough, now I love making decisions, because a part of it is that I simply trust myself to make a decision. And even in retrospect, if it doesn't feel like a great decision, I've learned from it, and then I can make a better decision next time. So that's been my approach to just like helping organizations develop their people, really honing in on just that character development piece.
Which makes me feel that comes back to mindset, right? Like,
It
how
does.
are
It's
we
all
showing
mindset.
up as leaders? Yeah, mindset and that mindset mastery. I get the privilege of serving as an interim leader. So I do interim CEO, CDO, and COO. And Sonia, I've seen the same thing where the culture of the staff has been broken down in some way, that their confidence, even, and it doesn't matter how long they've been at the organization, how, the age of the person, for me, it comes back to the culture. What was the culture that they were in? Were they empowered to make decisions, right? Like, was their confidence built up to make decisions? And I've come in where it's literally everything has to be run through the CEO, which at that time was me. And I was like, why is this happening? Why is everything, it's literally like, it funnels into the CEO, which stops a lot of the progress, a lot of the efficiency, productivity. So I love that you called that out. I think that's like a super wise observation that you've named.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. And a part of it is because I've done a lot of like research and studying on just like human nature and human development and human relationships and just how people function in life. A part of it, because EDs have so much on their plate, what tends to happen sometimes is that, let's say a decision needs to be made and then folks are waiting on the ED to make the decision, there may not be that communication loop back to the person. And so what happens is that now there's a gap in communication. And what often happens with humans is that when there's a gap in information, our brains automatically try to fill in that gap and then it can be really just like the most like out of this world, information that fills in that gap. So in order to be able to eliminate those type of challenges in the first place, I always encourage organizations to figure out just how to help people just be comfortable in their own work. So then now it's not creating other layers of like dysfunction in the organization. People are so complex, and it's not that it's a bad thing, but it does require a level of understanding to just know how people function and then how does that happen, in the container of an organization.
Yeah, I agree. And I know there's so many listeners that are going to say, I need to talk to you, right? Or maybe we need to do some of the scenario planning. So I'm curious if you could share, how can people learn more about you, Sonia, as well as your company and, how you serve? Because again, you do so much great work. You yourself have pivoted over the years. And so I'm sure there's listeners that are going, yeah, I'm resonating here. So where can we find you?
I love that. Thank you for asking. So what I would love for folks to do, if they want to get a feel for just who I am and the information that I deliver to people, is checking out my YouTube page, which is Sonia Daniels PhD. Really simple. So checking out my YouTube page, and I have a lot of content on that page around mindset mastery in the workplace for leaders and business owners and organizational leaders. And so a lot of it talks about different components of things that leaders tend to struggle with. So we do talk about emotional intelligence, but that actually is niched down to talk about emotional granularity, which is a concept around people being able to name and identify their emotions and then, resolve their feelings and emotions. Is great for the workplace. And so it's a topic that I'm really passionate about. So I would encourage folks to check that out. And then I also have a number of other topics as well around motivation for leadership and just things that leaders really do struggle with sometimes. So I love talking about that. And then secondly, I would encourage folks to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm super active on LinkedIn, always posting. And so it would be great to connect with folks there. And then if folks are interested in fact, reaching out to figure out if we would be a good fit in working together or partnering together, I do encourage them to visit my firm's website at sdanielsconsulting.com. And then if they're ready to move forward, they can schedule a complimentary introductory call and we can just talk about all the things that they're working on. And the biggest part of it is in my intro calls, I love to talk about ideally where organizations want to be, and then we figure out how to build that bridge there. So those would be the three places I would encourage folks to connect with me.
That is so fantastic. YouTube, LinkedIn, website. So
Yes.
check
Super
out
simple.
all the services. And
Yes.
final question for you, Sonia, is there a takeaway, any particular, word of advice or nugget of information that you want to leave our listeners and leaders with today?
Ooh, I feel like that's a loaded question. I would encourage folks to I would encourage folks to find their way back to themselves. I know that sounds very like very maybe a concept that might, sound a bit out there, but I would encourage folks, especially those in leadership positions where they're leading other people, to find the way back to themselves so that they can help others do the same as well. I was watching this podcast a few weeks ago with this celebrity. Her name is Lauren London, and she said a quote that was so profound to me. She said that she's recognized that our purpose as humans is for all of us to walk each other home. And I was like, wow, that is so true. And so that is my goal for working with people, is that let me figure out how to help you get to where you want to go. So that's my advice.
I love that quote and that saying. So thank you for
You're
leaving us
welcome.
with that. I
Of
think that's
course.
beautiful final words. Sonia,
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for opening up in this conversation. And thanks for being yourself. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you as well.